Do you truly know what it means to be in an eternal covenant with God? In today's video, we will explore the powerful pact God made with Abraham, one of the most significant in history, shaping the destiny of an entire nation and still impacting millions today. The promise seemed impossible, a prosperous land and countless descendants, even when Abraham and Sarah were already of old age. But it was this covenant, marked by a symbolic and powerful act, that ensured the continuity of a chosen people. If you've ever wondered how faith can transform reality, or what it truly means to be committed to something greater than yourself, this video will provide the answers. We'll show how this pact can teach valuable lessons about faithfulness, perseverance, and the power of belief, even when everything seems difficult. Stick with us and discover how Abraham's covenant with God can inspire your own faith journey. It all started when God revealed himself to Abraham at a decisive moment, calling him to leave everything behind: his land, his family, and the safety of his home. The promise was grand. God would give him a prosperous land and descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth. Without hesitation, Abraham trusted this divine call, even without knowing where he was going. Imagine the weight of that call, leaving everything you know to follow an invisible voice, a promise that seemed impossible at first glance. Abraham didn't question. He obeyed. In his mind and heart, there was a deep trust that God would fulfill his word, no matter how unlikely it seemed. It was a faith so solid that it remained unshaken by uncertainty. This act of obedience transformed Abraham's life forever, shaping not only his future, but that of entire generations. God's promise was no small thing, and Abraham knew that this decision would place him at the center of something much greater than himself. As he journeyed to unknown lands, Abraham was not only heading toward an uncertain destiny, but also carrying the weight of divine responsibility. He didn't know how everything would unfold, but he knew that if God had promised, he would certainly deliver. The promise of a fertile land and numerous descendants was a spiritual bond that connected him directly to God's purpose. Abraham was called to be the patriarch of a story that would unfold over the centuries. Abraham's trust is a timeless lesson in faith in action. He didn't ask for proof. He simply followed. Each step he took was a reflection of his unwavering obedience. God's call isn't just about the present, but about the future he plans for those who trust in his voice. Abraham was walking toward the unknown, but with the certainty that God's plan always comes to fruition. He knew he was at the beginning of something much larger. Little did Abraham know the depth of this promise. His initial trust was just the beginning of a journey marked by covenants, trials, and demonstrations of faith. The first step had been taken, but the story of his lineage and the fulfillment of the promise was just beginning. Years after the journey and unwavering trust in God's promise, Abraham was called to a pivotal moment: the formalization of the divine covenant through circumcision. This act was more than just a ritual. It was the symbol of the eternal covenant between God and Abraham's descendants. Circumcision marked the separation of a people, not just physically but spiritually, as belonging to God. It was a sign of faithfulness and obedience that would be passed down through generations, carrying deep and lasting significance. Abraham, already advanced in age, accepted this pact without question. He understood that this covenant was far more than a tradition, but a permanent bond with the Creator. Circumcision represented God's unbreakable commitment to him and his descendants, making them distinct among the nations. With every child born from his lineage, this mark would serve as a visible reminder of the divine promise and the call to live according to God's precepts. This covenant wasn't just about Abraham. It extended to all his descendants, creating a unique identity for the people who would become known as the Hebrews. Circumcision symbolized the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between God and his people, a commitment that involved both blessings and responsibilities. Faithfulness to this sign would play a crucial role in Israel's future, reflecting their spiritual and cultural distinction throughout history. The act of circumcision became a defining religious and cultural marker, but also a spiritual one. Abraham knew that by accepting this covenant, he was solidifying a bond that transcended time. Each generation that practiced this act would reinforce the pact made by God with Abraham, creating an unbroken connection between the past and the future. More than a physical act, it was a constant reminder of God's faithfulness and the need to live according to His laws. Abraham took another step on his journey of faith, now with a tangible sign that the divine promise was drawing nearer to fulfillment. The covenant was sealed, and Abraham and his descendants would carry this mark as proof of their eternal commitment to God. Yet the full fulfillment of the promise was still to come. Finally, after years of waiting, God's promise to Abraham began to take shape with the birth of Isaac. Sarah, who had spent much of her life childless, now held in her arms the living symbol of divine faithfulness. Isaac was not just a son for Abraham and Sarah, he was the beginning of something far greater. He represented the start of the lineage God had promised, a people who would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. The birth of Isaac marked the first step in realizing the covenant God made with Abraham. Seeing his son, Abraham must have felt a mixture of relief and gratitude. Years of faith and patience were rewarded with the birth of the heir. Isaac was the living proof that, despite time and unfavorable circumstances, God's promises always come true. Each smile, each laugh from Isaac was a constant reminder that God does not fail. The birth of Isaac wasn't just a personal victory for Abraham and Sarah, but a historical milestone for humanity. Isaac's birth was not just about family joy. He carried with him the responsibility of continuing the lineage God had promised. Isaac would be the link between Abraham and future generations, those who would inherit the promised land and God's blessings. Isaac's birth was the partial fulfillment of the promise, but also a new beginning. He would become the father of Jacob, who would later become Israel, and thus the promise would continue to unfold. Isaac's arrival was a spiritual milestone for both Abraham and the story of faith. He symbolized the fulfillment of God's faithfulness, not just in words, but in concrete acts. Isaac's birth showed that even when everything seems improbable, God always fulfills His promises. And Abraham, now with his son in his arms, had the confirmation that his faith, patience, and obedience had been rewarded. Now that you've seen the depth and impact of God's covenant with Abraham, the question is, how can you apply that same faith and commitment in your life? Are you willing to hold on to your trust, even when promises seem distant? Abraham taught us that true faith requires patience, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to what we believe. And it's precisely that trust that can change the course of your own story. So how about reflecting on the promises you've been waiting for in your life? How can you keep your faith strong even in moments of uncertainty? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about your faith journey. And of course, if this content resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning more about how these great covenants can influence your spiritual walk.